Just
You don't mean it's
milling around.
Here we go.
Yeah, if it's sure. All right. Well, hi, Cisco.
Hi, how are you, Pastor Alonso?
Yes.
It's
man.
good to be with you here tonight. We're going to have we're just going to try to have a conversation about some of the things that are taking place here in the International District and really everywhere around the Albuquerque area. And this may seem like a strange juxtaposition in the beginning, but hopefully and prayerfully we'll travel the path together and explore this concept. Tonight we're going to be talking about the zombie apocalypse versus Christian charity, right? And you know, that phrase can sound kind of overwhelming to people, but you know, as you go through the city, as you go through the International District, as you step outside the doors of New Life Church of God, you see people that are caught in the grip of fentanyl. And people that they're struggling to walk, they're struggling to concentrate, they're struggling to do, you know, almost anything really. And so these concepts, they're not that hard to imagine when we're talking about the zombie apocalypse versus Christian charity. We're going to try to figure out how these two ideas can intersect, because like I really think they can. And you've seen some of this right here, being a pastor in a church with the homeless, the problems with fentanyl, the problems with that go along with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, first off, thank you, Cisco, for, you know, when you reached out and you're like, hey, I have this idea. Like, I love the concept, right? You know, there is coming at some point in time a zombie apocalypse, this thing of, you know, those that are undead that, you know, we're going to have to reconcile, right? And
yes.
And it's at our front door. I have seen many of these things, and I've also been part of some of these things in, you know, the path that brought me here. I mean, I was strung out on meth to the point that there was one period I was up for like 21 days. Like,
yeah.
I was absolutely a zombie. I mean, like you become nonsensical, and you really aren't living a very healthy life. So
yeah,
definitely recognize some of these things.
And this is a quote that I have here for that says, "The zombie apocalypse has stripped away our humanity and left us with only the primal instinct to survive." And what we've seen with the scourge of fentanyl, what we've seen is, we've seen, of course, the people that are going through addiction, that are addicted to fentanyl. We've seen that their humanity has been stripped away, because people that are caught in the vice of addiction and substance abuse, they're not living; they're simply existing. Right? But not only has it affected and stripped away the humanity of those who are caught in the middle of the drug addiction, the middle of the suffering, but it's left people, the communities in the neighborhoods that are constantly having to worry about it. Every time I step outside, every time I go down the street, every time I got to worry about people trying to break in. I got to board up everything because I don't know what's going to happen. My business is going down the tank because people are just doing drugs in the open air. And so like you find that the people who are in the grip of fentanyl, like they're trying to survive, but then you see that the communities, you see the neighborhoods, like they're just trying to survive. And people like don't know what to do anymore. And that's where Christian charity becomes a vital component to bring back the humanity and to restore the human condition, because I think that this has left us in a twofold predicament.
Yeah, I think that's brilliantly stated. I think that there is often a lack of awareness to the plight of others.
Right.
And you know, as we talk about here in conversations that you and I have had, the entire scope and purpose of ministry is to reduce human suffering. Someone once said, and it's not the person I heard it from certainly didn't create the phrase, but we suffer because of Adam's sin, because of your sin, and well, because of my sin. That's
Right.
why we suffer. So the human condition is rife with suffering because of humans and their own actions. And so ministry, if it is focused on reducing human suffering, it is engaging in that restorative element that God has always sought to bring creation back to the wondrous nature it was intended to have.
Right, and that's an excellent point, because our God is the God who restores, right? And so we see the beautiful picture in Mark chapter 5 of the man of the tombs.
Yes.
We see the picture with the man of the tombs, and the Bible clearly states that Jesus goes to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, and immediately when he gets there, he's met from a man with an unclean spirit who dwells in the tombs, and no one could bind him with chains, and people had tried to intervene, and people had tried to help him, and it shows a picture of what I think is happening here in the International District. It shows a picture of what I think is happening right here within just a 4 or 5 block radius, where you have people they need to be restored, because the people that you're seeing that are in that state, they're not zombie people, but they're made in the similitude of God. But it takes a work of the Spirit to look beyond the frustration, because the things that are happening in the city of Albuquerque and in the International District, like, they're very troubling to people. Like, they don't know how to handle it. Like, they don't know what to do. And as far as we can see, and as far as we can tell, there is no there isn't hardly
Is this just limited to the International District?
Well,
no, we're talking about outside of the 4 walls of here as well.
Okay.
So what happens is that people just don't know what to do.
Sure.
So we have the beautiful example with Jesus, because Jesus comes in, Jesus sees this man, and Jesus goes after the one. And I think that that's where Christian charity comes in, because through the love of God, with the eyes of love and with the eyes of Christ, we can look past the addiction. We can look past the aggravation. We can look past the violence. We can look past all the things, and prayerfully we can see the potential that Christ sees, and not just a stigma or a zombie or a statistic or somebody who's just sadly, tragically just going to overdose, and then people aren't going to have to worry about them anymore. But it takes the lens of the Spirit, I believe, to see that, right?
absolutely. So, the lens of the Spirit, lens of the cross, those are 2 phrases that regularly pop up in the groups that I hang out with. You talked about something in this passage, and this is one of the most valuable contexts to examine in Scripture. And so there's a couple things that I'd like to preface it with.
Yes, absolutely.
And it is that we often, as the church, pray that we want the one, but if there aren't 10, we're not happy. And so you might have to work and work and work for the one.
Yes.
And is it worth it? Well, we pray that we're okay. We're like, Lord, just let me impact one. But like, if you impact one, it's sometimes never enough. And people are like, I want more than one. And so this man, the man at the Gadarene tomb, is such a brilliant example of how the modern world still struggles, and the modern church still struggles with this context. And in it, in particular, this passage closes and says that after all the healing takes place, he's sitting there in his right mind.
Yes.
And the disciples are eminently frustrated by it. Like, we're reading a family-friendly text, right? But it says that they saw the one who had the legion sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid.
Yeah.
They were afraid because they can't change that mindset, and really it's a prejudice. It's a prejudice that you're unwilling to move the goalpost, or you're unwilling to not hold someone accountable to everything in their past in order for them to get to that next step. So these disciples, they weren't there when Jesus had the conversation, whatever conversation he had, because it clearly tells us they weren't there. They came back. So did they see, the pigs, lumbering into the sea? It's a different part of the story. But I think the really important part is that they were frustrated. They were not happy, even though Jesus impacted one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with this concept where, in order for our ministries to be successful, and in order for our churches to be successful, that they have to be packed, and that we have to look like everybody on TV. And we followed this. There's been this erroneous pattern of the last 30, 40 years, with big meetings and big lights and all those kind of things. But truly, it is that one person that just truly matters and is unique, because if you can change that one person, then there is a ripple effect. And you see the ripple effect of Christian charity with one person, where he becomes a better person. He begins to impact his community. He changes, he impacts his family. He becomes a better employee. He becomes a productive member of society. So just one has tremendous effects, right?
Absolutely. The mindset really is examining things from God's point of view. And I'm sure, many of you in the audience, or those of you online, you've probably heard say that, with God, 1 + 1 is always 1, right? It doesn't matter how many, it's always 1. And so John 17 gives us a wonderful insight into the way that God looks at unity and the way that God looks at the togetherness. And it really is the only time that we see Jesus praying for himself. Like, we have the words captured where he prays for himself. And in among the things that he says, Father, I pray that they would be one, just as you and I are one. I and them, you and me, and them and you. Mm-hmm. And he says, and those that will hear their word, that they would also be one. And so the idea that if we are a church of one, then every one matters that much. So we're not a church of 99 who goes after the one. We're a church of 99 ones who don't let one go.
Yeah, that's positive. That's good.
That's the gospel.
Yes, it is.
Because if the gospel isn't for you, if it's only for me, then it's idolatry.
Yeah, and
but
then it's the Depeche Mode. Then it's your own personal Jesus. Yeah, your own personal Jesus, and so we have, we've talked about that, and you have to be careful with that, right? Mm-hmm. Now, as we go back to George Romero's film, the Night of the Living Dead, it seems this is kind of interesting. I found in George Romero's film, the townspeople, there was a portion of the townspeople where all they wanted to do was destroy and eradicate the ghouls. And you see that here. You see that here. Yeah, kill the monster, right? Burn the witch, right? Like, you see that here with people who are unhoused and people who are severely addicted to fentanyl. It's almost been likened to a war where you have two sides. You have a group of people that just want it all to go away, like no matter what the cost. And then it seems to me like you have another side, you have another camp, if you will, because it seems to be that there are two camps. The first camp is that you almost love people to death, right? And it almost has an eatable component as well to it. You feed everyone, you clothe everyone, you give everything, and there's the debate on that. Do you love people to death, or do you tell people the truth? But then how do you tell people the truth with love? That's the caveat. That's something that's hard. And then, so you have the two camps where even in the film, you remember at the end when the good old boys come in. And the good old boys come in with the shotguns, and they begin to just mow down the ghouls or the zombies. And there's people that are out here in our society they don't know God. Sadly, there is probably some who do know God, and if they had it their way, they would just eradicate and get rid of the whole problem, right? Because people don't know what to do, correct?
Yeah. You know, addiction is one of those funny things. Why do people get addicted to something? Is it because of the way it makes them feel? I would argue that is probably the reason that people get addicted to things. So when people talk about chemical addiction, while there is certainly this outward substance, right, that you can ingest or in whatever form that causes a change within you, Jesus spoke very plainly about those things that are in your heart and what happens when what's inside of you comes out. And Paul writes about it later, and I think he's talking about a form of addiction. And it's an addiction that the church, frankly, struggles with. And you can find it, you can look it up for yourself, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31. Sometimes our friends that celebrate Lent, I'm like, hey, if you want to give something up, Dr. Pepper's not going to change your life. But this is a good list to start getting out of your life. Look what it says. It says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Well, what is slander? Slander is saying something about someone that isn't true. And you know, as Cisco mentioned, as you mentioned a moment ago, every one of these individuals is made in the similitude of God. Like, our problem in the church is that I think we might be the zombies, like in all transparency. Like, we want everyone desperately to see life in us. And we refuse sometimes to look to see that life in others. And if my gospel, right, if my approach to dealing with the living dead is to just mow them down, just to do away with them, then there is no love in my heart for them.
Yeah.
There never has been.
Yeah.
And so I have this slanderous nature that I'm like, that person is not savable, so I might as well destroy them. That person will never change. Like, I have sat in churches, and I think sometimes people don't actually mean the things that come out of their mouths, but it doesn't change the fact that it comes out of their mouth. Now, sitting in a church, and someone literally said from the pulpit that they prayed for such and such family, and you know, they were unrepentant and they're going to hell. And they added the word amen at the end of it. And I'm like, we throw that word around like crazy, but don't ever say, so be it, that a family is going to go to hell. What's wrong with you? Right?
Yeah, that's awful.
But we turn that into a church thing. Like, it's just a church thing.
Yeah, and that's terribly incorrect. And in a sense, you know, it's almost like the church. It's almost like at times the church becomes the good old boys at the end of the film, where we're just running around, just getting rid of people. Let's just clean up our town. Let's clean up the corner of our street. Let's clean up our community, and whatever it takes to get these people out of here, then let's just go ahead and get them out of here. And that is not Christian charity.
No.
But yet, until we can admit and see that we have that potential in us, and I believe that Ephesians 4, when you're unrepentant of these things, that malice, that bitterness, all those ideas, that is what leads to that kind of a mentality where you just want to get rid of people that have problems, because you don't want your church to have problems, you don't want your community to have problems, you don't want your society to have these problems, because you have all of these things in your heart, and your heart begins to harden. And that's when you see people as you see them through the lens of a stigma, where, oh, they're just a junkie, they're just on drugs, they'll never change, they're always going to be this way. And wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be nicer, wouldn't it be sweeter for us, wouldn't it be sweeter for our church, for our community, if we could just get rid of these people? So you have that component, but then you have the other component of literally loving people to death.
Yeah, I mean,
and
Jesus did that.
And this is something that I wanted to talk to you about, because Dostoevsky would say that love is a harsh and dreadful thing.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, like, how do we, because like I work in the middle of the fentanyl crisis, and there are many times where I have to be honest with people and I have to say, you know, look, you're doing fentanyl. It's going to kill you. You need to go to detox. God loves you, but you still need to change, because if you don't, you're not going to live very long. You're going to face incarceration. All these awful things are going to happen to you. So sometimes that's why in my notes I have that loving people to death with that Oedipal component, because the Oedipal component is that devouring, smothering force of love. And that's not really love, because you don't really want the person to change, because you want to keep them and you want to control them, and so, like, how do we get across that with Christian charity?
So I think our struggle really is that we insist on there being a them, right? Like there is no us and them. And many in the church, like you described, you know, the good old boys coming, you know, at the end of the movie and saying, well, let's just eliminate the threat. The threat is the other, right? Fear of the other. Sometimes I think it is us surrendering our desire to be God, right? Like we so desperately want to be right that we will commit to making sure that no one has a chance to get out of the mess that they're in. And if they don't, well then by golly, we've proven ourselves right. And if we've proven ourselves right, then we can point to prophecy and say, oh look, you know, I've proved myself right. That's not the fulfillment of prophecy. The fulfillment of prophecy is people actually loving one another. It's almost like what you described. I was talking to a person the other day, and they said, well, we're in the end times because you can tell that the love of many has grown cold. I said, I don't think anybody likes anybody. I don't know that we've loved anybody. I don't know that we're at a point or we can say that the love of many has grown cold, because they've never loved people.
Yeah.
How do you grow cold if you've never loved someone?
Yeah, and the problems that we're facing, you know, we're talking about the unhoused, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about suffering, we're talking about the human condition. And you can go back as far back as you want to go, and you will see poverty, you will see suffering, you will see plague, you will see people sick, you will see drug addiction, whether it be alcoholism, whether it be opium, whether it be, so these problems are universal, right?
Absolutely.
Like these problems, and we've struggled to solve these problems for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so how can we dogmatically say that these are the end times when these kind of things, unfortunately, they've been happening for a long time. And then people go to the other extreme where they say, well, this is the end times, Jesus is coming back anyway, so what difference does it make if I really get involved? And that is a wrong type of attitude as well. Like, let's just sit around, let's just wait for Christ to come back, and I'm going to get out of here, and this whole thing will just go up in flames, it'll just burn up, and then who cares? And that's not Christian charity either.
No. What it introduces, right, is this dangerous thing that we think, especially as Western Christians, as Christians here in America, we think that biblical events can't unfold without us. We think that somehow, because, you know, we speak English and we've got pictures of Jesus that looks like he was born in Ohio, you know, that like all of these things, that somehow America has to be at center stage. I mean, so far that, you know, for how many years now have people been talking about Gog and Magog and equating this country with that country and trying to figure out what John was you know, saying, and you know, through his apocalyptic vision in the Revelation, as he's describing things that he would have no other words for. But we're so desperate to make sure that they're things we can define, because we're afraid to just trust God.
Yeah, and a lot of people, like you mentioned the apocalyptic literature. A lot of people, they make these dogmatic claims, and they don't even really understand the basics of literature. They don't understand metaphors. They don't understand hyperboles. They don't think those things are necessary. You know, you can't tell me that apocalyptic. You can't be that dogmatic with apocalyptic literature and the metaphors and the creative language. And a lot of people that, you know, like you said, they're more concerned about Gog and Magog than they are concerned about what's happening outside of their church. That person who is on drugs, that person that has nothing to eat, that person that is shivering in the cold, but they want to argue about Gog and Magog.
Well, they forget who they were, right? And if we were to back up just a couple chapters, I think Paul touches on it, right? In Ephesians chapter 2, he says, "Therefore remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision," right? Which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were, that you were at that time separated from Christ. And what are the conditions of being separated from Christ? So you're alienated from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers to the covenants of promise, and then having no hope and without God in the world. Does that not describe the kind of person on the outside of the door of whatever church, that kind of person that we're saying, not only are you alienated from the promises of God, but I'm going to shut the door so that you know that you're alienated from the promises of God.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that in Ephesians?
I wanted to talk to you for a second about there's a lady that I know that's in Roswell, New Mexico, and there was a young man that was unhoused. He was a homeless kid, and he came up to Albuquerque, and I was talking to her about Albuquerque, about the International District and what's going on here, because what's going on right outside of these four doors, like, people know about it. There was a young man that came into our facility yesterday that hangs around up here, and he's shot in the stomach. He's all tore up. He's all messed up. So this isn't just about International District, because this is taking place all over the city. But she likened Albuquerque and the fentanyl and the suffering that's taking place with drugs and all the problems that surround that. She called it the meat grinder. Right? She said these, she said, what's this kid going to do with the meat grinder? The awfulness of the situation that we're attempting to thresh out became more real in my mind when I saw a physical picture of a meat grinder. It's been a long time, but you've got that thing, and that's what's happening to people with the drugs and getting on fentanyl and people, like this kid from Roswell. He was homeless in Roswell, but then he came to Albuquerque, and he was like, I've got to get out of here. He's like, because I don't know what to do. He's like, these kids out here, they're violent, they're mean. He's like, I don't know how long I'm gonna make it out here. And so, one of the ways that we're going to exhibit Christian charity is you have to see the meat grinder for itself. And I wonder how many people in the church are really familiar with the concept of the meat grinder, or do they not even want to think about the meat grinder? Do they even want to acknowledge it?
I don't know that we do. I don't know. It's that Disney princess theology. I don't think we want to confront that. I'm not Mordecai, right? I'm not Esther. I'm Haman, right? We don't want to confront that I'm the hireling, right? That we don't want to confront that.
We don't want to integrate the shadow in any of it, right?
The thing that has exactly right.
Carl Jung.
Even though Psalm 18:11 says, "You make darkness your hiding place."
Yeah, you integrate the shadow. Yeah, and part of integrating the shadow is saying, I'm the priest that steps over the man on the highway of blood. I'm the Levite that did not stop. Because, we all think, especially ministers who minister in the International District or work with the unhoused, we all think that we're the Good Samaritan, that we're going to take our time and we're going to, we're going to shell out the 2 bits or whatever for the end. But in reality, we fail to see ourselves as who we really are at times, and we step over. We're the ones that step over the wounded. We're the ones that step over the dying.
Absolutely.
Because we've got to get to church, and we've got to perform, and we've got our religious duties, and we've got to be seen, and we've got to be heard. And the rest of the world, well, let's just not worry about all of that. And that's very sad, and that's very tragic. And so, what are we supposed to do with that?
I think largely, right, it's always down to recognition of your own heart's condition. Right? The Bible says judgment starts in the house of God. The Bible says that judge yourself and you won't be judged. You know what's right, you know what's not right.
Yeah.
And some of these folks that they don't even conceptualize that something may not be right with the way that they approach things is very telling about their heart's condition. While I have ministered to this community for the vast majority of my ministry career, my time here in Albuquerque, and as you described, you know, from this young man that came here and left because it was insane, I have not felt calluses on the hands of working people. Like I have felt calluses on the hands of some of the unhoused that, like, you know, we take their plate, you know, and, you know, they take a plate from our hands, or we shake their hands, we're praying for them. Like, I've never felt calluses like that on someone that works in construction ever. Like, it is so hard out there. Like, the last thing that most of these individuals struggling with this need is that self-righteous, pompous attitude that comes only from the hireling, right? And so, like, I think John 10, 12, right? You know, I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. Good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I mean, the fact that you insist on calling someone goats means that you don't believe that God could change them from a goat to a sheep.
And none of us think we're the hireling.
Well, we don't want to be, but who else are you?
Yeah, because we all think
He
that
who is a hireling and not a shepherd, not the shepherd. That's really what that should be. Not a shepherd. That should be the definitive article, the.
Yeah,
the
messianic,
shepherd,
right? Yeah.
who does not own the sheep. I don't own these sheep. No one owns me. We're all laboring together. I got to know what someone's hand feels like if we're both laboring together. Like, I can't just pretend that, like, you'll get better if I just send good prayer vibes your way. It says that the person that, you know, is that hireling, they see the wolf coming, they leave. Like, we have walked away from the body that's not here yet for far too long.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and that's tragic. I got 3 questions for you that I have specifically that I think would interest you. Okay, in Romero's film, right, Night of the Living Dead, the disgruntled character, Mr. Cooper, does nothing but complain about the situation. Remember, they're in the house, right? And remember, they're boarding up the windows, and they're boarding up the, you know, they're fortifying the structure. And you can drive around the city, and you can see there's windows boarded up. Businesses are decaying. You know, you see, I call it old Albuquerque, because for me and you, it really is the old Albuquerque. But like downtown is wrecked, like
Not gentrified.
Yeah, but it's destroyed, and you know, businesses. You know, every week a business disappears, and people say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm closing up. We've been here for 20 years. But so you see, you know, the lead character, he's boarding up the doors, and he asks the character Cooper to help him, but Mr. Cooper won't help the man board up to keep the zombies or the ghouls out. And I think that there's so many, especially who don't know Christ, but there's those who do know Christ, and they do nothing but complain about the situation instead of getting involved. You know, before we open our mouths, we must begin to see the city for ourselves. We have to see the unhoused for ourselves. We have to see the people and realize that they really are people, just like Jesus would deal with the demoniac. You have to see it for yourself, right? Moses had to leave the comforts of the palace because he was drawn by the power of the Holy Spirit, and he left behind the royalty, and he left behind the pedigree, and he left behind the comforts, and he went in a chariot or out on a mount or however he saw it, but he went down into the brickyards, and instead of complaining and constantly murmuring about the situation that's going on, pastors and ministers and laity, we're going to have to go and see it for ourselves, right?
I would say this: those who complain, like you described, are those who refuse to disciple others. They flatly and categorically refuse to disciple. Their version of discipleship is sitting in an echo chamber. Their version of discipleship is affirmation that what they believe is right. But many people, Soren Kierkegaard, right, one of the philosophers that
yes.
we talk about, one of his overarching themes is that if you're going to present the idea of religion and just tell people what to do, but not show them how to live, that's not effectual.
Yeah.
Because there's no context.
Yeah, and that's not even true existentialism.
Well, there's no context.
Yeah, because
There's nothing.
because even existentialism, divorced from the ideas of Christianity, like you had to live right, and you had to follow what you believed, and you had to you had to try to make you had to embrace suffering, you had to embrace hardship, but you had to make the best of it and try to change the world, and you had to live the way that you were supposed to live. You had a certain moral obligation to be a better person and to strive for that, no matter how hard it might be, right?
That is where the idea that the term neighbor is not related to geography or a city. It is a moral concept.
Yeah, and who is my neighbor?
Anyone but the person in front of me is the answer, right? To the person asking that question.
Yeah, because they're like the lawyer, they want to justify it.
Everyone else is my neighbor. But this person in front of me is not my neighbor.
Yeah, and it doesn't work that way.
That's not.
Yeah, it's a cistern that won't hold water, right?
You have left your first love. See, the thing is, and this is one of those nails that I hit. Like, if I am so concerned with whether or not people see God in me, then it's probably pretty clear that I'm not looking for God in you. And if I'm not looking for God in you, then I'm not looking for the similitude of God. And I can cast a judgment upon you. And I can be slanderous because I have made you less than
you've made him
the
a
similitude
stigma,
of God.
a statistic, all those
I don't
labels.
have that right.
Yeah, no, of course not.
I
But
don't have that
but
right.
if we're not careful, we do that.
I think
we're
the church
capable
does
of
that
Yeah.
regularly.
Yeah.
I think that is a core approach to what we sometimes see the effort to reduce human suffering.
Yes. Okay. I got another question here. The narrative says, from the account of Mark 5:3, the narrative says that no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. Right? The Bible says that the demoniac would tear the chains off, that he would break the chains. Now, the human restraints remind us that this demon-possessed man was not without those who loved him. Right, because they would see the fits that were coming on because of demonic infestation, and they would try to bind him so that he couldn't hurt himself, and so that he could not hurt others around him. It couldn't really deliver him, but yet there were still people that loved him, right? And I think this shows this. Now, the question I have is: does fetters and chains actually help those struggling with drug addiction, mental illness, or being nonconformists? Because that's a big hot button issue for the Albuquerque area. Is like, I had this conversation with another person, like in the 90s, like if you were out in the streets of Albuquerque, and if you were particularly up in the war zone, which is now called the International District, and you were running amok, there was a 60% chance that you were going to get stopped, you were going to get pulled over, you were going to get thrown into jail. And now it is so different now. So can incarceration, can it actually help, or does it hurt?
So I think there's two parts to that, and I don't want to get off track. But like I think as far as the chains on the demoniac, I think those fetters could be placed by love, but I think that they could also be placed by hate. Like I think it depends on who's locking the key,
who has the key.
I mean?
Sure.
And the Bible is always, this is never a chain. This is always a key. This is always liberty. There isn't anything about the gospel that isn't liberty. And so that's one of those passages that is a little difficult to navigate like that. As far as incarceration, so mass incarceration, these are statistics that some of you in the audience may not, but we are a country that fully incarcerates 25% of our population at this moment. 50% of our population, 50% of the people who are alive today have been part of the incarceration cycle. 50%.
High.
At
High
this
number.
moment, 25% of our population is incarcerated, and of that, 75% are men. Those men incarcerated are not at home. Those men incarcerated are absent fathers. Those men incarcerated are not around the kind of any sort of nurturing or developing environment, and it is a systemic cultural problem. Putting people in a place where you don't have to think about them is not a way to fix the world that we live in. We will not incarcerate our way out of drug issues and out of mental health concerns. We will never, by locking up our, and I don't have the answer. Before people start throwing darts, I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
I don't have it.
No, but you bring
But
up a good
mass
point.
incarceration isn't it.
But you bring up a good point though, because you said that you can be put in a cell, so to speak, but it depends on who's putting you in there. It depends on who has the keys, because there have been many times for myself and other people where because of the circumstances of our behaviors, people have gone to jail. They've been able to detox. They've been able to get help. They've been able to clear out their mind, so to speak. And many people have found Christ.
I did.
In a cell, So I mean, I agree with you. There's not a clear-cut answer, but like that is a big debate now, is because we see the lawlessness of. In the film, we see the lawlessness in Night of the Living Dead, but we see the lawlessness here in this city. And one of the 10 Commandments is what? Thou shalt not steal. And one of the reasons that the businesses are being boarded up and the businesses are decaying and they're crumbling is because people are literally robbing places blind. And people are like, I can't have a business here. I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. I'm not going to put it. Because people are breaking the law and people aren't being punished for the laws that are being broken. So, like you said, I think for some there are that time apart, so to speak. They're able to reflect. They're able to detox. They're able to take advantage of the programs that exist within the system itself as being an inmate or whatever it might be. But then, like you said, it can also have that other flip side where it hardens the heart. People become,
Bitter, not better.
Yeah, they become bitter. They become not better, and that's what and that's what people are talking about all the time here here in the city of Albuquerque. And so, but I love how you talk about Christian charity, or the biblical perspective, that the Bible and the passages of the Bible, the teachings of Jesus, the canon of Scripture is always liberty.
Absolutely.
It always brings liberty. So
Well, that's what it's. I mean, like, I hate Bible reading plans for the most part because they interrupt like a flow of a thought, like the despair of Romans 7, right? 6 and 7. The despair of who will deliver me from this body of death is incomplete, but there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
Yeah, and
for the law of the Spirit of life has set you free.
yeah, and you have to look at it holistically too. Now, you can't just have a little piece here, a little piece over there. Yeah. So I think that's very, telling too. When you were incarcerated, did it lead you to Jesus, so to speak?
So definitely, I didn't come to Christ because I was ever afraid of hell. I think from like a logical perspective, from just a thinking perspective, like I don't know that I really cared.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was an irrelevant concept, right?
Yeah.
Like, so what I got tired of was that I kept thinking that I could do it right. Like Proverbs 14:12, right? There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death, right? And so like I got tired of getting locked back up. I got tired of not being able to go to Allsup's to get a cold soda or a burrito. I got tired of like not being able to do this or not being able to do that. Just watch that camera behind you. I got tired of like, just like not having that kind of freedom, right? That you order commissary on Tuesday and you don't get it delivered until the next Wednesday, right? Like it just, like all of those things were incredibly annoying. But then I began to consider in my own life, what were the things that were systemic and pattern behavior? And they were always things that related to selfishness, things that related to me wanting to be right, things that were related to all these other things, to pronounce bias and prejudice on someone in order for me to be right, to get ahead by stepping on someone. And so the idea, this Christian concept, I had been raised in a Christmas, Easter, special occasion, Catholic.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
okay.
And so, like, I went through catechism, I did these things, and I'm like, but none of that, although I knew God was calling me, I was refuting that concept. And so when I got to jail and like I was beginning to look at my life and beginning to examine and reflect, I was like, the decisions that I make, the way that I approach things and the way that I treat people around me is awful. And I can't continue doing it. And so then you begin to understand how God had to come down and say, all right, guys, you've got some stuff written down and you act like I'm telling you what to do, but I need to show you how to live. And so we have the person in the presence of Jesus Christ. That is what brought me off of that path to destruction. And I don't struggle with going back. I'm not worried about going to hell because that wasn't what drew me to Christ. It was understanding that this suffering and the brokenness that's in my own life and in the lives of others can go away.
Yeah, and some would say that, Dante would say, Dante implies that the journey upward always begins downward, right? So like some would say, that hell, that being in that cell is a type of hell, and that is a way for you to say, okay, whatever I'm doing isn't working, because I mean, like, even from the Christian perspective, like, how can we really contemplate and understand hell? I don't understand hell. I don't sit there and spend a whole lot of time on it. But like, so that's interesting. So it wasn't the fact that you were going to burn in a devil's hell that led you to Christ.
Nope.
But it was that moment where everything was kind of taken away, and you began to see the way that you had treated people and the things that you had done, and you knew that there had to be a change. And I believe it was at that point that slowly but surely you began the journey upward.
I'll tell you exactly that window. My thing in ministry has always been identity, right? Like just knowing who you are in Christ. If you don't know who you are, like Ecclesiastes 1:15, it's a great born-again passage, right? That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is lacking cannot be counted or numbered. Like, you don't know what you don't have until you come to Christ. And then you have this realization of all the things that have always been there that you just haven't taken any part of. You haven't, like, participated. And what I've learned, and one of my mentors shared with me, that with human beings, when you introduce authority before you introduce identity, you sow the seeds of rebellion. You don't mean to.
Yeah.
But you are telling someone what and how and holding them accountable for things they have no context for without helping them understand who they are.
Yeah.
And so I always had this perspective of myself and what I thought of myself. And I wanted to say that I hated myself. That's why I stuck needles in my heart. That's why I was trying to destroy my life. And that's why I got to the point where I don't care about jail or whatever. But I think deep down inside, we really do care, right? And so even though I felt this way about myself, on Christmas Day, and I thought it was strange because it wasn't a Sunday, it was the day we had prayer at the jail, 2 Bible studies.
Sure. Yeah.
It was Christmas Day. And they called Bible study, and I was like, that don't make no sense. I was super depressed. I was like, I ain't going nowhere. I've been here 6 months already, man. I hate this place. I hate you. I hate everybody. And then people started coming back into the pod with tamales and beans, and I was like, oh, maybe there's something out there I want to be part of.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was like, hey, can I go? And the CO was like, no, they called Bible study. You go. And so like, I had him call the sergeant. The sergeant came. I asked the sergeant. He's like, well, did you go when they called? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, what do you want us to do? I'm like, I always go, man. Come on. He's like, you want to go because there's food. I'm like, come on, man. So they let me go. And I walk around the corner to this day room. And I see the pastor that had come in, doing Bible study that, led me to the Lord, in that context. And he and his wife, just the two of them, are putting tamales on a plate with a hot tortilla, a plate of beans. Do you want red or green chili? You want some milk? And I'm like, what is wrong with these people? Do they not know who we are?
Yeah.
Do they not know that everybody drives by this place and would be just as happy if they never saw us again, except for the people that are crying on the telephone?
Yeah.
Nobody cares, bro. And they intentionally don't care. Like, out of sight, out of mind. And I'm like, what is wrong with these people that they would do this on Christmas Day?
Yeah, take their time, take their effort, come
For a
out here.
piece of work like me.
Yeah.
But this year was the 18th year that I've been part of that meal. That meal changed my life 18 years ago. But 17 years in a row, I've given some of the same dudes the same plate every year.
Yeah.
They've not been out for Christmas. They're doing a life sentence 90 days at a time, bro.
Yeah. Well, Christian Charity came to you.
Christian
in your
Charity came to
darkest
me.
hour.
What, in your estimation, what do you guys think the best thing the church could do to involve a program or a system or something that would be beneficial to the homeless people? What as a church would be the main, let's say there's three main things we can do as a church to help them that have positive results, where we're not doing things repetitiously, but we're doing things that actually help,
My answer's pretty straightforward. Cisco?
Yeah, I think we have to begin where Christ began with the man of the tombs. What is your name? What is your name? Remind people that they are individuals. Remind people that they're not just a person with a number. They're not just a person with a drug habit. That they, like he says, rekindle the spark of their true identity. And it doesn't matter if they're saved or not, but remind them that they're a person. They're a son, they're a daughter. And I think that is the first step. Is I don't see you as a problem. I don't see you as a stigma. I don't see you as dirty. I don't see you as this. I don't see you as a burden of society. I don't see you as a zombie. I don't see you as a ghoul. But simply, what is your name? Because many believe, they've studied this for hundreds and hundreds of years, but many believe that when Christ said, what is your name? We always immediately move to the legion. He was, the legion answers. But the man inside, Christ was sparking that hope in that man to remind him, oh yes, I may be this way, full of all these problems, full of all these demonic infestations, but somewhere deep down, I remember now that I matter, and I remember now my true identity, and that identity has to be awakened. And it's not with John 3:16, it's not with sermons on hellfire and brimstone. It's about true, genuine compassion and asking someone, who are you? Because we lose sight of that, and the church does that all the time.
Let me answer the question. So my answer to that question, and I completely agree with what Cisco outlined, but I think it really has to do, and two scriptures in context. In Leviticus 13, it talks very, very in depth about the problem of leprosy. Right? So we can imply, that there is this other kind of thing. And so it's where the person's walking around, right, saying unclean, unclean. It says they have to cover their lip, and everywhere they go, they shout unclean, unclean.
Right.
Our problem is we're shouting that back at them. Like, we're not letting them shout unclean and saying, hey, that's not who you really are. Let me pray for you. as they're shouting unclean, we're echoing it to make sure that they know they're unclean. And the Bible does say in that passage, it says that he has to show himself to the priest, and the priest pronounces him clean. Jesus pronounces people clean. It doesn't happen any other way, but if I keep saying they're dirty, they'll never hear it. So the answer to that question, that for the framing of the context, is really in Psalm 23, right? And the idea that there is such a thing as an enemy is contrary to the New Testament. Jesus came, bore the full penalty of wrath from God so that we could be one. Now, I don't know where in there is any idea that there is suddenly this new entity, this new human that is an enemy. But in the Old Testament, they viewed things that way. In the New Testament, I don't have permission to have enemies. It's not in the Bible. I am an enemy to someone.
Yeah.
But I'm not allowed to have enemies.
Yeah, you're not allowed to hold grudges and
Right. So explain to me where you get that liberty, because I don't see it. So what I do see is in the 23rd Psalm something that is contrary to the idea of this eternal grudge thing. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Now, why does he prepare that table? In the New Testament sense, it's he makes the table bigger. So how does the church change that? Time. Follow me. Let's do this thing. Hang out with me. Read this passage. What does that say to you? You get people involved. You don't tell people what to do. You show them how to live. Our problem as a church is we're not patient enough. We'd rather have enemies and say there's only 4 chairs. I'm sorry, you've got to go. But the table that God prepares for us is so that we can invite others, because we're not allowed to have enemies. That would be my answer.
Right.
David.
As you guys were talking, this is a huge subject. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And people don't want to hear me on this, okay? Because
Well, they may not be able to if you don't speak up. Because we're streaming live on cameras.
okay,
Say it loud.
But the thing is that it is deeply involved in the politics that we have, and I have that we've accepted, okay? And these definitions that people don't even know what they mean.
Oh, people
Socialism, capitalism, they can't even give me the definition. That's enough of that. But what I did when you guys were talking, and this is a great talk, okay? But what I did was say, what is true religion?
Through what?
Well, James tells us, pure undefiled religion is this. Don't be a jerk.
Well,
Look out for people. Care about
the
them.
New Testament, the New International Virgin, religion that God, our Father, accepts as pure and faultless,
Right.
is this to look after the orphans and the widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Now that pollution comes in, and I'm telling you, I know a lot of people that will give up their Bible before they give up their AR-15, but they're Christians. And to me, they're not, okay? And
Yeah.
they say, who are you to judge? And I said, well, I'm looking at the fruit. It's a bunch of lemons, okay?
I think Psalm 68, 5 and 6 touches on that, right? It says that, God is the defender of widows in his holy habitation. He's the father to the fatherless. And exactly what you described.
But
right?
it also goes on in other scriptures for the foreigner.
Right. But we have this idea, right, that at a certain age, a person stops being an orphan. That when they become an adult, they're no longer an orphan. But until they have a father, they are an orphan. And it's my job to be that surrogate parent to introduce them to the father. I don't care how old you are. Until you have a father, you're an orphan. But we get cruel, and we're like, I don't want to deal with
the
it.
the last statement you asked me earlier. What is your favorite passage?
Well, it's because I wanted you to read it out of a 1611 copy, and I wanted to watch you struggle.
Yeah.
That's why I
I
asked.
can't read that English.
That's why I asked you.
But it's we are like men who look at ourselves in the mirror,
Yep.
and we walk away, and I'm paraphrasing, but we don't know what we look like.
Yep,
Okay, that's the church.
sure.
I mean, and I mean the church at large across America, okay? Because if you tax somebody, you affect my 401k, okay? There's a lot of.
We'll come back to those. Those are super valuable, but I think right now the main part
Yeah.
of this initial
We're
one
gonna-
is the
yeah.
church's response, like, how do we act as a church? The
Well-
rest of it is how do we act in the economic and political ones, and we'll
One
pick that
last
up.
thing, one last thing. When you say the church, are you talking about this church? Or are you talking about?
We'll save that answer for the next episode.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to end it, and we hope that you traveled with us together, and we hope that we accomplished some things, and it was good to have the conversation with you, and we want to thank everybody for watching, and we will be doing these periodically, and we hope that you will tune in and give us some feedback. And God bless you, and good night.
Good night. God bless you. David, you stop it for us? Thank you.